So welcome to our Evolutionary Leaders community call on regenerating bioregions. And I know I'm really excited to learn about this planetary-wide initiative that's springing up in many places from our discussion leaders today and any of the evolutionary leaders who have joined us who want to be part of that conversation as well. So we need to get going quickly today. So let's begin with just a moment or two of silence to connect with the earth. Maybe Kanu, would you like to lead us in and out of that?
Okay, sure. Most important thing is feel your feet on the ground. Feel all four corners of your feet on the ground so you're really touching the earth. And as you touch into the earth, feel that the qualities of the earth, the groundedness, the stability, the dynamic movement, all of that is encompassed in the planet, in the planetary earth energies that are moving through us, through the beginning place where we touch on our feet and up through our bodies. So with the breath, may we breathe in harmony with the breath of the earth, the breath of the planet, and feel your breath breathing in harmony with all the sentient beings on the planet who are breathing. And feel the connection to the water, to the wind, the air, the wind, and the sky, as we see ourselves part of a whole system. We are an integral component of the whole entire holonic movement of the planet. So as you prepare yourself for listening, for learning, you can open your eyes if you've had your eyes closed. You can bring your awareness into the Zoom space, but realize that the Zoom space is encompassing a much larger place on the planet as we see where every person is from and how we collectively gather here together. So blessings on this beautiful day after eclipse day, lunar day, and blessings on everyone here, and blessings on the health of our planet. So be it.
Thank you, dear Kanu. And thank you for mentioning oneness, because this is being recorded early in the month of September. And this month we're focusing quite a bit on peace, but next month will be a lot of focus on oneness. We have the Global Oneness Summit of Humanities team, and we will have the Oneness of Humanity Awards presented in New York City to some evolutionary leaders. So thank you for bringing us into contact with the earth and our oneness, the wholeness that we are part of, that we're going to be exploring today. So we have 4 wonderful discussion leaders today. We have Juan Kaiten, who is the Associate Director of the Evolutionary Leaders. We have John Clausen, who's been associated with Findhorn for many, many years. And we have you, Kanu Kogod, and we have Daniel Christian Wahl, whose expertise really is in this area. So I'm going to hand the facilitation over to Juan Carlos to begin our program today. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. So it is a pleasure to be here with all of you and to be holding the space for this dialogue, which I personally believe is one of the most important conversations we need to have at this time. Um, we know the planet is going through turmoils and all sorts of challenges, and it is in a way difficult to embrace all of that, and many people live in despair. But what I say is when we look to the other side and we see everything that is emerging, it's impossible not to be jumping of joy and happiness to see how it is that the planet is coming together. We are experiencing the great unification, the great convergence, and it is people from all walks of life awakening. So one of the key elements for this unification of this great convergence that is happening in humanity, I believe, is bioregional thinking is a way for us to come back together to connect to nature. Um, I believe bioregions are the way, the glue for humanity to unite. Bioregions are, in a way, the postal codes of planet Earth. Is the way planet Earth is organized through the watersheds, through rivers, prairies, through the different cultures coexisting there. We need to have deeper understanding of what is the bioregion we belong to, the region that holds life to us. So in that way, bringing bioregional thinking in this conversation is really important that we can see how we are interconnected. Bioregions will guide us into understand how it is that we are interconnected and interdependent. Every community challenge we have, we need to address it with the bioregional thinking. If we are just thinking on cities, on political borders, we are limited to understand the whole systems. Bioregions are a way to understand how we are intertwined, how we are interconnected, and also it will help us to transition from the nation state to nature state. It is a way for us to be reconnected to Earth. And that is one of the most important elements to understand how it is that we can work together. So it is a real pleasure to be holding this space. I've been working personally on the bioregional world and thinking for the past many years. I started working on collective intelligence, holding the question, what will it take for humanity to unite? How we can hold a critical mass of people taking collective actions, everybody all at once. What I understood is that we need to nourish pockets of coherence. People in communities holding the ground for water projects, social justice, environment, innovation, all of them reaching higher levels of coherence, yet connecting to the neighboring communities. So we can have a conversation about how do we become self-sufficient on water, on food, energy? How do we secure all of the resilient capacities of our community to really flourish, to revitalize communities, the environment, and start shifting the conversation of how do we get into accelerated growth, into how do we optimize our social systems. We can have more with less. We can increase the capacities of well-being in our communities by shifting the ways, understanding how we can optimize the ways on how our bioregions become revitalized and self-sufficient. So we have some questions that we want to explore during this panel. First of all, we want to explore what is the history of bioregions? How did they started? We know that it is not a new thing. It's been out there for a while. So we would like to explore that question. What is the history of bioregions for the past possibly 30 years that it's been there? If we ask the nation, the original people, indigenous people, they will say, well, that's been there for forever. We've been working always that way. We are catching up. But we also want to understand what are the implementation challenges of a bioregional initiative. Understand also how the emerging bioregional movement is representing an opportunity for greater unity and collective actions at the planetary scale. And finally, to point out what are some of the most relevant bioregional initiatives or how we can participate. Whether we like it or not, we are all in a bioregion and we must become part of the solution. Whether we are acting global, local, we are part of a bioregion and we need to learn and understand what is the place, we play in the bioregion and how we are contributing to that. So, well, thank you everybody for being here. And I would like to start our panel with Daniel. If you would like to start and share a little bit of the background. How did we get to bioregions? How did we realize that it was important to start thinking bioregionally and how this has been evolving where we are now? Thank you, Daniel. Please.
Thank you for this opening, Juan Carlos, and thank you for everybody who's organizing this call. Obviously, I'm very passionate about the whole topic of bioregioning, or refitting the human presence back into the context of place, which is really what it's all about. I thank you for saying that if you ask indigenous people, bioregioning as a practice has been around for forever. I would go as far as saying that it is our species' long-term evolutionary survival pattern. None of us would be here on this call if our ancestors, no matter where on which continent of the planet, had not been careful custodians of the place that they believed themselves to be emergent contributors to, not owners of. We lived on Earth in right relationship at a scale of bioregions for most of our evolutionary journey. And you could say that if you look at what we now call history, the last 10,000 years or so, the departure from the pattern of right relationship and being regenerative and sustainable on this planet is when we departed from bioregional patterns. So to some extent, it is the return to bioregioning and the appropriate scale of human settlement that we're now seeing as people are coming back to the bioregional movement. But of course, when you talk about the history of it, it's also important to name a few re-emergences of this way of seeing that have happened in the Western world in the last 100 years. As you said, finally remembering a pattern that is much, much older. So, and one of them is Kropotkin, with his book Mutual Aid, was very much focused on mutual aid and self-reliance at the regional scale through collectively owned resources that are managed for the benefit of the ecosystem and the people. And then shortly after that, Patrick Geddes in Scotland really developed a whole theory of town planning based on a bioregional vision. And he created something called the valley section, in which the city was only designable or manageable if you looked at it in the context from the mountains along the river all the way to the sea, which is very much a bioregional vision. And then the very often named bioregional start is really just when all of this managed to get to the United States through somebody called Lewis Mumford and Ian McHarg, who were both students of Geddes. And when Ian McHarg ran his, what was it called? The Place We Live In or Live On. It was a PBS series that he ran in the 1960s, talking to the luminaries of the time. And then he launched the first Earth Day with a talk about bioregioning or bioregionalism and bioregional development. And it's around that time that Peter Burke and Raymond Desmond and people in the Planet Drum Foundation in San Francisco started what was the US American bioregional movement. And then there are people like David Hankey, who in Arkansas had already created a regional bioregional congress. And then I think it was in '89 that the first National Congress of the North Americas happened. And now what's happened in more recently is that I would say over the last 5, 6, 7 years, the conversation about regenerative cultures and regeneration has led people to come back to what is the appropriate scale, and has also led to the understanding that it's great to create sustainable communities, eco-villages, intentional communities, kind of living labs in which we try to live in right relationship with place, but to really fit all of us in all our diversity back into the living regenerative cycles of Earth, life's regenerative impulse, we have to do so at the bioregional scale. And this impulse has now been picked up by various people. Yeah, I don't know where to start because I don't want to name them in order of preference, but from the approach of common land that is looking at bioregional restoration of ecosystems and social systems and ecological systems at a regional scale to the Design School for Regenerating Earth, or then R3.0. It's just recently, I was about to run a big conference on it. And then there's a Ashoka and Common Land connected initiative called Bioregional Weaving Labs. So wherever you look on the planet, there are these impulses towards bioregioning. And I think it's really important that as this is gaining tractions, that we watch out that we don't create some kind of this is the way to do it, because the way to do it is to listen to the fact that it's already bioregioning or bioregional regeneration is already happening in every place that we live in, because as human beings, we're part of life, and life is fundamentally regenerative. And in every place, regeneration is happening right now. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether we call it bioregioning or bioregionalism or bioregional development or regeneration or whatever. If we let life's regenerative impulse flow through us, and any act of caring, sharing, nurturing, healing, restoring, regenerating, protecting that we do at the local and regional scale is already that process in motion. And what we now need to do is to fan people into understanding that we still have a chance in these turbulent times, and our chance is to let life's regenerative impulse flow through us again. And the way we prepare for the turbulences that are certainly coming, if not imminent, is to build bioregional resilience, community resilience. And all of that is about building relationships between people, re-regionalizing local economies, recreating the capacity for people to meet basic needs within regional limits and within ecological limits. Because ultimately, bioregional development or bioregioning is human evolution carefully attuned to the biocultural uniqueness of place. It happens in different ways in every place. And so all this talk about oneness, unity, coming together is wonderful, but let's not, or wholeness, the danger of all these terms is to abstract everything into one version. And that's been the mistake of the last 150, 200, 300 years. What we need is lots of diverse versions. We need a pluriverse. We need people to let their bioregions and the vitality of their bioregions speak through them and through the land itself. And so the unity is in diversity. That was a bit of a long answer. Sorry, Juan Carlos.
It's beautiful. Thank you for all of the background, the story, and the importance on how bioregions are actually becoming a way to unify humanity. I am really thrilled to see how the world is coming together and unifying in ways that were not happening before, and it is nature in a way that is bringing people back together to reach higher levels of cohesion and coherence, which is the quality of the relationships, how interconnected we are. So for that, I would like to bring our anthropologist expert in leadership and community building, Kanu. From your perspective, how do you understand the bioregional movement as a response of a collective response of Gaia's intelligence on how humanity is coming together, becoming like a collective social body? How is this a process on how humanity has been reaching higher levels of interconnectivity? We are moving from nation state to nature state, but eventually we are becoming planetarians. We are reaching planetary consciousness. And it might be that only thinking global and feeling becoming planetarians, we might find a way to unify and solve global problems with global minds. What is how do you believe this can happen from the anthropologist and all of the social leadership you have experience with?
Thank you. Thank you, Juan Carlos. And I just want to start off by saying I am not an expert in bioregions, bioregional development. I'm coming new to this in the last couple of years. And it seems like the next level of where I've been working in organizations at a systems level for so long, and understanding how systems work together from a holistic point of view and looking at patterns as an anthropologist and looking at where a person as an individual places themselves in a larger system, in an organization. So taking that kind of understanding and putting it into the bioregions is where I'm going to be speaking from today. So not a planetary perspective, but really nature of place, much like Daniel was speaking to. And I do want to emphasize a couple of things that both you said, Juan Carlos, and you said, Daniel, by starting off and really saying the bioregion is the glue for humans to unite. I like to think of the bioregion as like putting a natural boundary around a system and just calling that a bioregion. So some have speculated there are 52 bioregions on the planet. And the place where I have been working and have the most experience is in Mexico, where I've been a part of a team called Seeding Change, and we've been advisors to a group of people who are in Yalapa and who are building an eco-wellness hotel. And this eco-wellness hotel, in order to make it viable and take a bioregional perspective, it's looking first at, okay, what are the critical needs of the community in this area? And if any of you are familiar with Yalapa, it is part of a much larger watershed, which goes from the Lerma River out of Mexico City into Lake Chapala. So it's part of this bioregion. And in this bioregion, this one community is building this hotel, and their need is to have stable energy and to have clean water and to have a way to pick up trash, because their trash used to be banana peels. You throw a banana peel down and it's going to get recycled. But now throwing a plastic bottle or down and not having a way to take care of waste management, that's what a bioregional approach does, is it takes that, what are all the systemic needs that a community might need, and how does that community play in with other communities? So I want to then also emphasize another thing that Daniel said, and truly say how this impulse, this regenerative impulse, is really a part of a waking up process that I think we are all seeing as we realize the degradation of the planet, and we want a way to restore, recycle, refurbish, reinvent. So we're taking things that are already there in the community and the kinds of thinking that are already in the community and making that into a bioregional way of thinking. So what are the challenges? And I'm going to name 4 challenges. Cultural fragmentation is one, cultural fragmentation and identity conflicts, because for example, in Yolapa, you have a group of people that have their own way of thinking. They're kind of a natural boundary. You can only really get there through the jungle or by boat. So even though they're part of a landmass, it's difficult to get to that region. they have already their own ethnic and cultural boundaries. And so this community within this watershed will have a differently fundamental relationship from other communities that are in the watershed that are like part of Puerto Vallarta or other areas in there where it's not such an urban community, and those economic interests are going to be vying. So if you build a hotel and you're bringing in outside people, you're also having to really work with where is the community, and what is the thinking of the community, their identity, and how does that fit within a bioregion? So that's a challenge. Second challenge is a social mismatch in decision making. And that is in looking at the municipal governance of this place in Yelapa. The people who are making the decisions about the community, it's a jointly owned community. It's been, if you own land there, it's because your ancestors have owned land there. Otherwise, you're coming in and you're leasing the land with permission. So governance and decision-making is very much a place-based thinking in this area. I'm using this just as an example that could be like that in in other areas as well. So the politics and the conflicts over who has authority over what can already see it's going to be built in as a challenge. Who has the decision making around putting in some new development into a community that's going to impact everyone in the community. There are power asymmetries. That's the third challenge, and resource access. Some people will have more access to resources. There was a guy who built his own water tanks and put his own clean water in around his home. And then he just realized that he could supply the people who were all around him in water. So everyone in his general area, his neighbors, are all allowed to use his water, which is a lovely way to start building that social cohesion. So something, a water, the need for water, bringing people together, separates as well as brings people together. There are power asymmetries and resource access. So who has access to what resources, as I just gave an example of that, and the pressures on the communities. And the fourth one is knowledge integration challenges. You've got indigenous ecological knowledge that every one of us wants to honor. And at the same time, we have the technological, scientific research, traditional agricultural practices, and the local experiential knowledge. And so that is also a very important challenge to how we integrate the knowledge of people. And there's a wonderful opportunity to build culture brokers and people who have both the technological savvy as well as the cultural savvy and know what's going on and can act as these brokers. So it's a wonderful opportunity to seed people in places to bring other people together in this kind of knowledge. So just quickly, opportunities for unity and collective action in a bioregion. Shared vulnerability is common ground. That's the first one. And when we're vulnerable to water needs, to energy needs, we are going to come together and try to figure out, because we are humans. So why not, bring the best of decision making and into the shared vulnerability. So it presents us an opportunity to coalesce these kinds of knowledges together. Place-based identity formation, that's a second opportunity, so that people are not just, as Juan Carlos said, part of a nation, but part of a nature state. not just from a nation state to a nature state. So place-based identity formation, I'm part of a nature state that becomes a community of practice where we're not just like coming in and, outside people come in. It's the people from inside begin to share practices, begin to learn from each other and how to steward and build ties, kinship ties with each other to create communities of practice. So that's another opportunity. Another opportunity is embodied learning and culture change. We're going to change. Culture it's always changing, and we're going to change. As the environment changes, we change. Anybody who knows spiral dynamics knows that's the fundamental principle. We really don't change as a collective until the environment changes. When the environment changes, we change. And so this presents a wonderful opportunity for what's called situated learning that happens through shared practice, again, going back to that. So there's no outside ideological persuasion coming in and saying, you need to do this. But from inside, we build the way to respond to these environmental challenges. A fourth challenge is multiple scales of organization. And a bioregion allows for this multiple scales. So when we're looking at individual behavior change from the watershed to looking at climate policy, for example, how does the individual, how does a group come together? So we have gardens, we have restoration sites, we have community energy projects that allow people to develop new habits and relationships organically. So just to reiterate the opportunities, shared vulnerability can bring common ground, place-based identity formation can strengthen our social ties with each other. Embodied learning and culture change can build our skills and give us communities of practice and situated learning. And the fourth one is bridging multiple scales of organization. So I'm going to hand it over to John to fill in all the places that he has experience with. Or give it back to Juan Carlos to give to John. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Kanu. And yes, you're next, John. And well, as Kanu just shared, something important to understand, and what I like working with a bioregional perspective is that we have many networks, many people working and trying to do something better for humanity. Yet it is not going to be an event. It's not going to be a gathering. It is a long-term community engagement process. It's like an iterative 1 year of activities that needs to happen at the community level where we nurture the community, the interconnection. Yes, we can have events, festivals, gatherings, but it is a coordinated community engagement, community innovation process that goes in a spiral, like yearly, iterative, yearly going up into higher levels of cohesion and coherence. And that definitely, as Kanu said, it requires a lot of community healing, healing the collective trauma, building the bridges between different cultures. Spiral dynamics is really important to get some understanding on how do we reach that. So in my experience, it's about how do we reach higher levels of coherence. And in that way, John, I would love your genius and experience working at the community level because resources are there. People has a skill. The will is there. What is missing for really embracing all of the wealth? How do we unleash the wealth of communities to really become self-sufficient, resilient, and thrive? So it is not technology, it's not money. It is about how do we tap it into our collective intelligence, collective wisdom and consciousness to really make it. So I would love to hear from the background you have in all of these fields. How do you think, how you experience that this is happening, or how we could move forward?
Gosh, hello, you all. that's a question that I'm living with, and I don't think I can lead into it, but I'll get to it. A lot of interesting things have been said, and I think I'd like to start by just kind of sharing a little bit about my journey to embracing bioregioning and bring in a little bit of the history. Because, I appreciate the notion that bioregioning can be seen as a survival pathway for our species, and that it's been the dominant organizing principle for thousands of years, and perhaps until not so much recently. And now we're kind of inching our way toward the necessity of re-embracing it. And in 1983, I was visiting the Ozarks with some friends, spending several weeks there, and I met David Henke, who was passionately organizing the first North American / Turtle Island Bioregional Congress. And that was actually in 1984. And so I was kind of immersed with David and his friends into the enthusiasm of that development. And it didn't actually draw me into it, because as interesting as the concept was, and as powerful as the passion and the organizing he was doing with folks who were resonant with that idea, it just seemed too far removed from the current systems that were in place to have sort of immediate relevance. It just seemed like in a separate universe in a way. So I sort of had this minimal awareness of the bioregional movement for the next 20 or 30 years. And there were, I think, 9 more of those bioregional conferences, North American bioregional conferences, going up to about 2009. And there were lots of other local things. I mean, a lot's been happening, so I don't need to go into that. Now, my work in the last 30 years has been very much supporting and being involved with all kinds of regenerative initiatives, particularly to do with local economies, community development, eco-villages, land trusts, land conservation, local currencies and regional currencies. And so I've been supporting these, involved with them, funding them, and in this variety of areas. One area that I was particularly focused on is the Hudson Valley, where I have 5 or 6 projects that I'm deeply involved in. One is a beautiful, beautiful project called the Farmscape Ecology Project, and this is the book they put out, and it's called From the Hudson to the Tectonics, an ecological and cultural field guide to the habitats of Columbia County. And for the 16 years I've been supporting this project, it's always seemed like a bioregional project to me. And it is, in essence. And I was thinking every bioregion should have that depth of study of the natural flora and fauna and research and the culture and the relationships over history. And, their purpose is to foster informed and active compassion for the ecological and cultural landscape of Columbia County, New York, through participatory research and outreach. Why I mention this is because nowhere in that book is bioregion or bioregionalism mentioned, not even in the glossary, where they have biogeography and biota and all kinds of things. And when I was visiting them recently, I asked about that. So I will get into that. That's a point that I want to make, but I'll set that aside for the moment. So basically, de facto, I was part of the regeneration movement with the projects and my worldview. And it's only in the last, several years that I became aware of the current version of bioregioning. And it just seemed to perfectly provide a context and a scale for everything I was doing, and especially aligning it with a coherent natural system and being place-based. So last week I reached out to David Henke to reconnect with him, and he made a quote. We had a 2.5-hour conversation. It was lovely. But he had a quote that just sort of described my path back to bioregioning. And he he describes it. Where is it? All right, this is a quote. What has happened in the approximately last 5 to 10 years is that regenerative movements have been increasingly contextualizing themselves within the bioregional ethos. In my view, because it's so powerfully integrative from within Gaia's own natural biospheric boundaries, life places. Sometimes I refer to this present manifestation as the bioregional regeneration movement. This much accounts for the present reflorescence of bioregionalism or bioregioning in what we in the movement are calling its second wave. And then he finishes, my contemporaries being the first. At the same time, I'm immensely inspired and grateful to be working intensely with phenomenal young folks of the second wave on a number of fronts, and that's you all. And he's involved, of course, in the 11th North American Turtle Island Bioregional Conference. It's coming up in 2026. And incipiently in a planetary bioregional congress that's, it's being scheduled for some time beyond that. So one of the challenges that I've come across, because for me it brings coherence, it brings place-based, and it brings proper scale to the work I've been doing in so many areas. However, almost all of the projects that I'm involved with that are doing great work don't use the term bioregioning or even want to. Some of them haven't heard of it. I work with my local land trust, they've never heard of it. The folks who create that farmscape ecology field guide to the region, and they frame it as geographic, from the Hudson to the Taconics, and political, Columbia County. But it's really a bioregional, sub-bioregion of the Hudson Valley. And they just choose not to use that term because they don't think it will have traction amongst the different systems that are in place that they want to interact with. And I've had this conversation with Martin Ping at Hawthorne Valley Association and various other folks who don't use that framing. And with my national local land trust, who've never heard of it. And so the question I put on the table is, how useful is it? How good a use of energy is it to promote that term as the organizing principle that it is for me? How much to promote that in the colleagues and in the region I work with and the various systems that I work with? And I'm sort of exploring that as I get more involved in all of the wonderful things that are happening with bioregioning, with Daniel and Samantha and Isabel Carlisle and many Juan Carlos, many others. Is it enough to support them in the ways that they are working, or do we want to try and encourage them to develop this framework, which is what they're sort of evolving toward anyway? Would that be an interference, or would it be complementary and supportive? So I'll put that on the table and we can bring that into the discussion. As far as communities, I have come to the conclusion that trying to support local communities to become models of sustainable regenerative functioning is not the optimal approach, because in and of themselves, the communities are too isolated. They need to be part of the region that they exist in and find ways of constructively working with them. As far as the internal politics, that's where I come back to the fact that when I work with people who embrace the same values or similar values that I have, it doesn't necessarily make it easier for them to make effective decisions. And I work with a local community here in Connecticut, which is a very affluent community, but I actually spend more of my time working with a Findhorn community, which I wouldn't say is an affluent, but it probably has a lot of middle-class people in it. And as much as I'm aligned with the spiritual worldview and the recognition of our, of our oneness and interconnectedness that's there at Findhorn and acknowledged in everything they do, they are no better at making effective decisions than the local community right here in, New Canaan, Connecticut. And so these are all lively questions to explore. The bubbling that's going on at Findhorn right now around its reorganization, its total transformation of its organizational structure, and a growing up process, which you could look at in terms of integral philosophy or spiral dynamics, is what's making it relevant, because it doesn't have its act together in that respect, and it's trying to muddle toward it, trying to be as sensitive and attuned to everybody's process and everybody's input, and it's a learning process that's very rich. And I'll leave it at that, and maybe we could either have a couple of panelists address the questions before opening it up to the group, and then opening it up to the group for an open forum.
Exactly. Yes, let's go there. Let's open that to the panel so the panelists can answer your question, and then we go to the group. Daniel, Kanu, would you like to respond to that?
I'll just say something, pick up on what you said, John, about the challenges of decision making at community levels, and communities that have different identities around their community coming together and trying to make decisions. And what you were saying, I think it's a challenge. I don't have an answer. I just want to highlight that I think decision making is at a bioregional level is something that's a skill and a way of knowledge and a way of thinking that needs to be cultivated. And it's how do you bring people with different levels of skill together in a very inclusive and respectful way, and at the same time realizing that there are gaps in knowledge that everyone's going to have that's going to lead to different ideas about how to make a decision. So I'm not offering an answer other than saying I see very clearly the challenges that you're talking about. Maybe Daniel, you can help.
There are lots of questions, John, there, and a lot of wise reflection. I mean, do we all need to use the word bioregion? Certainly not. I think it helps at the moment because there is that upsurge and there's very different levels having that conversation. So it might help build a global conversation about how to be in right relationships with regions again. With regard to building or helping those who would really like to build a kind of staged process that enrolls bioregions, certifies bioregions, creates regional funding for bioregions. The shadow of all of that is that it creates another. It creates those bioregions who might have already been bioregioning for decades under a different name, who are suddenly not available, cannot access certain funds because you have to have gone through some course or some certification or some apply to some bioregional funding board. And yes, it's wonderful to help to build that framework, but only if we stay really, really conscious of that shadow, of allowing exactly your other doubt, all those organizations that have deeply rooted people speaking for place, as place, trying to heal their local economy, their local resilience, their local relationship between each other and with place. it doesn't matter whether they call it regeneration, it doesn't matter whether they call it bioregion, it is life's regenerative impulse coming through them. And for me, the danger, and you're right on the money there, is how do we build and support those people who are keen in giving people a kind of 101, this has worked in this place and in other places, maybe you want to try it in your place, approach to how do we get into this? How do we strengthen our bioregional capabilities? How do we map our bioregions? How do we look at even like there's a lot of talk about carrying capacity for bioregions, and that's a really two-sided way of working, like a two-sided sword, because the minute we define some kind of carrying capacity, we can begin to say this is too much. And then the question comes up, who is actually allowed to be here and who isn't? And another shadow of this whole conversation about the regionalization and the what Kanu was speaking to, the power of both shared vulnerability, but also the narrative that binds people to a place-sourced, place-based narrative. All of that is wonderful, but it can be hijacked by those who are keeping the other ones out, who want to create us and our bioregions and create an other. We're living in a time of climate change, and we know that global migration will move probably 1 billion people in the next 20 years. So as we re-regionalize and create these regenerative bioregions, we do need to be welcoming to some form of process of displacement. Otherwise, the danger is that people will hijack the bioregional concept into building fortresses of us against them. And that would be really, really bad.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think the way I've been working and using the bioregional process, it is about radical inclusion. And I've been working using the wheel of co-creation of Barbara Mars-Hobart as the framework. So what we do, we map every sector of society of a bioregion, and we start looking into how cohesive they are, how organized they are. Is there any level of organization in every sector of the wheel? And then we start looking for the coherence, which is, do they get along? How interconnected, how interconnected they are, how cohesive they are. And the coherence is about the quality of the relationships. So we do a map, we start working with a map of relationships, a stakeholders map, but we look into the relationships, and that's where we start working with experts on community healing. Like we're working with a group, the Collective Change, the Change Lab Collective, and they are experts on healing the collective trauma of communities. So that needs to be addressed. And my experience also is that we need to build capacity for collective intelligence. So I've been, there is a lot of work to be shared in terms of how do we go into reaching agreements. What I have found is that unified intention, a unified vision is what brings people together, a super ordinated goal. I work with a community in Mexico, in Guerrero, near Acapulco, and it was the lake that unified the community. It's like, the lake will not understand whatever political party discussion you have, or different religions or different classes. We managed to bring the whole community together and start agreeing on a unified intention that was saving a lake. And that lead us to start like going into a bioregional mapping on how everything is interconnected. We created indicators, and at the end, the decisions of what was needed was obvious. So there is a process on how do we bring all of the voices of the community to share a higher vision. We need to do healing, develop capacity. It is a process that I will love to deep dive in that. I've been working at the community level and have had many experiences on how consensus can be reached. We need to tend for that. It needs to be nurtured so we can go beyond the polarities. But that is one of the greatest challenges on how we can work that out. We also did that in Colombia, in Sierra Nevada with the Mamos in Pueblo Bello, bringing together the farmers and the indigenous, the Arhuaco people that they had confronted. So it requires time. So that's what I suggest is if we get into any bioregional development, we need to have like the commitment of businesses, governments, and the community itself for the long run, because it is a 3 years process to really start weaving a bioregional effort and collect some fruits. And well, I think it is time to open this dialogue to open the floor to the community. Please, anybody that would like to comment and bring more questions or insights to this. You're welcome. You can raise your hands. You can share some more questions, insights, or experiences.
Vinny
Nancy.
has his hand up, as well as Nancy.
Okay. Well, ladies first. You choose. You can go first, or let you need.
Oh, just a question about, I was working with California Student Sustainability Coalition years ago as their mentor, and they were in college, and all that fresh energy is just incredible. And they were so committed and made huge shifts in a huge economy of the California educational system, that whole economy, and shifted millions of dollars into the green economy. But I'm wondering what you notice the differences generationally, and if the youth are much more open and cooperative than the older community members that are maybe more set in their ways and used to things a certain way and don't have the new thinking. Do you find any differences there, and is that a lever that could be pulled to start activating communities more?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for your question, Nancy. We'll hold it. We'll also let Vinit bring his question, and then we can open the answers to the panel.
Thanks so much for this dialogue. It has long been clear to me that we need to start at the community level and then expand to what is essentially a regional community, even if we don't all identify that way, and then finally the global. I'm about to move to a intentional community in Costa Rica, and I want to see if there is essentially a manual you would recommend for how a community can begin thinking in terms of bioregionally, and then taking the next step, how communities can interact with other communities. If there's a book or a program that really encompasses that well, I'd love to know about it.
Excellent. Thank you. So we come back to our panel, our panelists who would like to answer the two or one of the questions.
I can go with regard to Nancy, involving the youth. I find from my work here, 15 years in, focusing on the bioregion of Mallorca, because it's an island or a set of islands, the Balearic Archipelago, that there's both the generational difference is that when we run bioregional programs, it's actually more the older generations that have the depth of connection to place, that want that celebrated. The youth wants to travel and wants to connect and keeps trying to create sort of virtual bioregions or virtual communities, friends all over the world. And part of bioregioning is a understanding what happens when we create that enabling constraint of committing to place and becoming expressions of place and becoming servants of place. And I find that there is a part of the youth that has done that cycle. They've gone out and traveled, they've come back, particularly here in this bioregion, and just want to reconnect with the ancient ways and make them new ways, reinvent based on how people have lived in right relationship with these islands before. So that's one thing. And now with regard to courses, it's exactly what's to be avoided, to my mind, to suggest one manual, one how-to guide. I wouldn't even suggest one course. There's sets of courses and different approaches. If you, for very little money, you can get really good information and some learning out of the Design School for Regenerating Earth. It's a monthly subscription-based thing in a community. It takes a little bit that approach of here's the way to do it. That's the only thing I'd be careful with if you choose to learn with them, because there's also like a learning journey that Guide Education's offering, which takes a slightly different approach. It brings together people who call themselves the Bioregional Learning Alliance, and they're basically people who are practitioners who've tried this in place for a longer period, and they're simply sharing from their place and their experience what worked for them, and leave it up to, like, it's a learning journey online, 10 or 12 examples. And the big learning is in the conversations with them and in hearing their individual cases. And yeah, so basically I would say look at as many diverse information as possible. And the last bit, because I heard that moving to Costa Rica bit, I mean, to some extent, I've done a similar thing. I originally from Germany, but I grew up with my grandmother in the Mediterranean, fell in love with the Mediterranean biome, and decided to make my home bioregion Mallorca. Be critically aware that when you move to Costa Rica, it's something that I had to learn the hard way. Bioregioning, and particularly activating bioregioning in a particular place, has to do with legitimacy. And you have very, very, very little legitimacy in Costa Rica when you arrive. I had very little here. I had to stay a long time in a certain way to not overstretch and sound like I was telling the Mallorcans how to do and what to do on their island. And even today, after 15 years of having brought funding to the island and weaving different organizations, even weaving whole alliances into existence, I still have to be very careful. I work almost in the second or third line back in the outer circle and try to connect people. The danger I find that can happen, and this is what I find with a lot of the energy in the Design School for Regenerating Earth, is if you have strong leaders who stand on a pulpit and say, we're going to regenerate this big bioregion, and then a small group of people of 15 friends claim like the big website and say, we're regenerating this whole area. Yes, it begins to start a dialogue, but at the same time, it puts a lot of people out who've been doing that for a very long time, just didn't call it that way. So those are just caveats that please be careful of, because otherwise you run into a minefield, particularly in Costa Rica as a North American.
Thank you. Great advice. Yeah.
Yes. I put in the chat the Regenerative Studio for more learning. They're an advisory group, and they work from the place of principles. And also, I would suggest Seeding Change, the team that I've been working with that looks at multicultural, looks at multi-capital impacts. So social impact, economic impact, ecological impact, environmental impact, and looking at ways of measuring the impact on an area from all these things, so you can see a kind of a system as a whole. Because what you measure, you know, people pay attention to that.
Exactly. And well, another important element to what you were saying, what Vinny, you were sharing, there is a conversation also about the doctrine of relationship and the act of interdependence. I believe at this moment, the conversations that are happening, I met like Al Gore's teams in long time ago in the COP15 in Copenhagen, 2015. They had a big, thick book about the act of interdependence. So right now, after hundreds of years of going through the independence of countries, there is some movements that are calling this the act of interdependence. And that would be an interesting thread to follow on how I believe the act of interdependence will happen through bioregions, because that is the true way to understand how we are interdependent and interconnected. And also Lawrence Bloom, before departing, he was working with Kalani, a Hawaiian kahuna, on the doctrine of relationship. Mindahi Bastida is holding that stick in terms of it is time to abolish the doctrine of discovery and embrace the doctrine of relationship, which is the way forward for humanity. And in regards to the youth, yes, I've been working also. There is a group in Brazil. They are doing amazing work with the youth, and they get the Oasis game, and they get to do all sorts of work with them. And their motto is, if you have to do something, it must be fast, free, fun, and fantastic. So there is no excuse that you don't have money and so on. Make sure you bring the children. They are the ones leading. They are the ones bringing the joy. And lastly, one of the formulas we use is to build an alliance between organized civil society and socially responsible businesses. Once we bring that alliance, everything speeds up in terms of having strategy, resources, and unity within the community. So it is a community weaving effort with a lot of skilling that needs to be in place. And well, we have three more hands here. I'll pass it over to Amanda and then you, Roger.
I guess I have a very ignorant question, since we're talking about bioregions and it literally has the word region, but the answer sort of came up that many youth are not so necessarily attached to one area and it is more traveling. Is there a companion idea or a region that is considered like the whole planet, where you don't attach to one, you know, where it is just like global citizen? And if so, I assume that would be very different, because then it isn't about a lot of the commonalities of a singular area. And so I don't know, anything that you can say on that. Does that exist, or is it something where you just say, no, that's a separate topic that's out there?
Okay, thank you for your question. And well, we'll let Roger bring his question, and then we can go back to both of you.
Okay, well, my question, the word that keeps coming up for me is ownership. And I think Daniel mentioned that early on, but the concept of ownership goes back probably 5,000 years. And it really seems to be kind of in the way, affluence and ownership. So I wonder if any of you have thoughts about that's kind of the impediment. And if you get people that own land that want to do good things with it, that's fine. But if you own the land and you have the power to back that, I mean, that's my question.
Thank you, Roger. Both very good questions. And I love like questions with open heart. Before that, for the panelists, if you have any links or additional information that you want to share with the whole group, please post it into the chat window. And now I bring it back to you. Who would like to answer these two questions?
John, you haven't answered yet. Do you want to give it a go? Is it hearing me? No.
You start, Daniel. You start.
I think to the first question, Amanda, the understanding that informs bioregioning and this identity with a territory that is both a biogeophysical terrain and a terrain of consciousness, as Peter Berg pointed out, is about healing our relationship to a living planet. In a conversation with Bill Reed, one of the founders of the Regenesis group, like he said something that is kind of obvious, but it's worth repeating, which is you can't heal the planet, you can only heal places. And the insight of the bioregion, people engaged in bioregioning, is really that what you're asking for, the wider, is I can become a good planetarian, like a good expression of the living being that is Gaia evolving, if I find a way to fit back in to a particular place and have a regenerative presence in it. That doesn't mean we all have to create a travel embargo and there can't be some of us who become the weavers between bioregions, or some who have particular skills of rehydrating landscapes that might spend time in different bioregions to help them bring back life to their region. And the youth is creating their own professions already in that space, and organizations like Common Land are building up young people who are basically helping people in bioregions apply the four returns approach to bioregional regeneration. The danger is always with these kind of people who want to be global in a kind of mobile sense. The impact of them, just in terms of living what they preach, is enormously high. So you have to be very considerate and mindful whether your presence is actually needed somewhere else, or whether you'd be serving better staying at home. So it's this role of staying, like being a kind of fast jet setting human being, is probably an expression of a system that we invented that just doesn't have a basis in how life can sustain itself. And we're creating more and more inequality around that, with more and more people living this hypermobile lifestyle. But as we mentioned earlier, human behavior changes when circumstances change. It's not environmental change, it's context change, and the context is changing rapidly at the moment.
Yeah, but it does follow sort of a human nature historical trend in how civilization has evolved, because I read a lot of history. And back in the 1700s, and right now I'm looking at the 1815 to 1848, and how developments in communications and transportation, which has happened throughout history, you have these bumps where there's sort of a revolution in transportation and communication. And in the 1830s and 40s, you had the telegraph and railroads. And what that did effectively was freed people from the constraints and boundaries of their bioregion. They could communicate freely outside of it, and they could travel freely outside of it, and they could bring in things that they couldn't produce so easily from elsewhere. And it began to change civilization. And it's been happening and happening and happening. And these digital nomads, it's sort of a lifestyle. And I know some of these young people who are digital nomads. They can work anywhere out of an Airbnb with their work, and you can't keep track of them. They come home once in a while and visit their parents. So it's like just an extension of that tendency. And the global citizen idea, or planetary citizen, I guess I could see the two sides of it. You know, there's a digital nomad that doesn't have a home, and then there's the person who envisions themselves as a planetary citizen, but has a basis in place, which is what is missing. So the bigger question is, how do we reestablish the connection with the natural world that the digital world makes it so easy to disconnect from? And that's a tendency that our technology is not helping with, unless any of you have additional information that can indicate that it is helping. But right now, it seems like it's a bit out of control.
Well, I think eventually there is, Barbara used to say, high tech plus high love equals high purpose. I think at the moment the conversation is about bringing higher love, higher consciousness. And as far as I have been understanding, is in the way we bring communities together to share purpose. That will help us align into higher use technology for good, so we can have better use of our data and optimize the way we build our our ecosystems, our bioregions. I believe there is it's not definitely all evil. There is a great opportunity with technology that could help us maximize, and we're building a bioregional intelligence dashboard, and that could help us have greater access to data so communities can make more informed and better decisions. So that's something in regards to technology. I just would like to share something about what Roger asked. There is this within the bioregional movement, the earth lawyers, they are bringing great knowledge in terms of how do we redesign and understand the ownership of land in a different way. Many people is working for the land to be protected, for the land to be co-owned, to go back to the commons. A friend in the US, they just got the first land to own itself. And that's a very interesting. I was like very puzzled and shocked to see, okay, that's interesting. The land, they just got a land to own itself and have rights. So there is a very interesting movement in terms of ownership. Definitely, we will need, I believe we will need to move into shared economies, where we go back into the commons and have a smartest way to share resources and to be smarter on how we optimize our social ecosystems, moving from like rapid growth acceleration into accelerated optimizing of our resources. And that I believe is coming together. Just to respond also to Amanda's questions, the indigenous groups like Mindak has been working with the One Earth group and his wife Geraldine, and they have identified 52 bioregions and across the world. They are looking into bioregions also as a way to map sacred sites. They work from the angel view, which is how the energy grid is connected through the planet. And then they look into how bioregions are connected. And there are 844 ecoregions. So that's the way on how also cultures and regions are interconnected. Sometimes bioregions could be very big. So to reach global impact, I agree with Daniel, we need to work bioregionally so we can touch the ground and reach coherence with local communities holding the ground around water, justice, environment, health, but connected on bioregional.
Hello, everyone.
So that is something important, and I will just stop there. There is very interesting work on how the indigenous people work in regards to energy. They map the energy, then they define where they can farm, then they define where they can live and what needs to be preserved. So it is a holistic way on how indigenous people understands bioregion, and then we bring balance to the system. And we have Richard. He wants to speak. I don't see his hand, but then would you like to comment to that, and then we bring it back to Richard?
Just briefly, because it's come up a couple of times. As people work their way into this bioregioning world, there's actually a little bit of confusion in the nomenclature of what we call a bioregion, and particularly this website One Earth and so on that take this approach of looking at the larger functional landscape units and calling them bioregions. So the entire Mississippi Delta or the entire Amazon Delta is one bioregion. What we've been really talking about is a more regional approach. It's what you were just referring to as ecoregions. And so again, we haven't luckily talked much about how do we define bioregional boundaries, because the learning is that it is a living, breathing fabric of overlapping landscapes that are both territories of biogeophysical, ecological reality that inform how we live there, but it's also regions of consciousness, regions of narrative that are how humans have related to that place over time. And so just be aware that as you dive deeper, you will find a little bit of confusion around terminology, and be very aware if anybody defines bioregional boundaries as rigid boundaries of othering. Like there's a beautiful conversation where I spoke to Tyson Yanka Porter about the patterns of bioregioning that indigenous Aboriginal cultures had for probably 40 to 100,000 years. And he defines, like, says that the different tribal units that had bioregional roaming patterns were seeing boundaries as boundaries of kin making rather than kin breaking. And that's something we need to relearn as we become bioregionalists again.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Daniel. Thank you for that. Because it's the knowledge sharing. It's the knowledge. There's a study from a long time ago on how to, change people, called the change communities' ways of thinking, called the strength of weak ties. And it's sometimes the weaker ties that have the most impact on creating a larger change in a way of thinking. And I remember one of the first studies I ever did in anthropology was around a whole group of people having a mindset of scarcity. So even though all kinds of things change, that grabbing of ownership that Roger was referring to, like if I don't get mine in this piece of pie, there won't be anything left. And as long as people continue to think like that and have that as an underlying mindset, it's going to impede. It's like a shadow, on how the land is ever going to own itself, as you referred to it, Juan Carlos. Yeah, so I just want to bring that in and to underscore what you're saying, Daniel.
Thank you. Well, we got to Richard and we're getting close to the end, so we will Richard's question.
Oh, if it's okay just to make a couple of remarks. I'm really excited to be here and listen to all the wisdom. I guess the last comment from Daniel was really interesting. It's like the three bears, looking for the bed that's just right in a home. The bioregional scale is maybe too large in terms of having people to relate to it directly, and the smaller scale of, say, an eco-village or intentional community might be too small. So what I've discovered in 40 years of building community is what's just right is what I remember in a conversation with Joe Brewer about this. We called it a micro bioregional anchor. So those are like villages, towns, cities, counties. So when I was working in Reno, it was a county of maybe 500,000. It had multiple towns and cities in it. So that's the first comment. The second, it has to do with how do we build a bigger tent? And that seems to be a thread through this conversation. And I want to illustrate it with a comment to what a narrow tent would be. One of the movements we built was a neighbor network. So we literally developed a network of 100 smaller neighborhoods. So it was activating at a really micro scale. And I remember a couple months ago, I posted on LinkedIn an article about that experience of neighbor networking. And I remember clearly somebody from who's organizing connections amongst the folks involved in bioregioning. And his comment publicly was, why would I want to get to know my neighbor? They don't care about bioregionalism. just let that just settle. Let that process. And I'm going to give you some really concrete ways of approaching that. So there was this group in England, and they wanted to organize their neighborhood and their neighbors around climate change. So that was the container. Maybe to us, it's significant, but to the average person, it's very, very narrow. Another person in Britain, I don't know why it's the UK, but anyway, in the UK, they wanted to organize neighborhoods around tenants versus landlords. So in other words, they wanted to get all the renters together against the owners. So those are really narrow containers. A larger container, for example, we found, which is this. What does it mean to love our neighbor? What does it mean to follow a prescription that is a universal wisdom tradition about the interconnection between ourselves and each other and the natural environment? And then how do we represent that within a neighborhood? In order to do that, you have to consider the needs and interests and concerns of people. And most people don't care about bioregionalism, but they care about safety. They care about their children. They care about income inequality that they can't afford to buy a home. They care about the natural environment.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is the perfect statement, what you're just saying, to close this. It is about people's deepest heart desires. That's what bonds everybody together. So really want to thank you for bringing this. We will take this as the closing remarks. Before that, I will just pass it over to Deborah so she can close the panel. And thank you so much. But thank you, Richard. That was beautiful.
Thank you all. Thank you to our wonderful discussion leaders. Thank you, Juan Carlos, for doing such a great job facilitating this conversation. Thank you, Daniel Christian Wahl, Kanu, Kogod, and John Clausen for bringing your wisdom to this important topic. And Richard, too, and I'm so sorry we had to cut you short, but we have a hard stop here on the hour. And please put whatever resources you like in the chat, and I will make sure that all of the resources are listed in our YouTube room where we will post this conversation. So thank you, evolutionary leaders, members of our community, and any of you who are watching this at another time who are leading the evolution in your part of the world, in your bioregion. I hope you got some real inspiration for these beautiful approaches to healing our relationship to the planet that gives us life. So thank you all.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you.